What if I told you that two armies fought over the same bridge for 180 days? And when it was finally over, neither flag was flying above it. Both sides lost more men on that bridge than in any other position along the front. And yet today, no one in Moscow or Kyiv wants to talk about what really happened there. The bridge had no name on most maps. Locals had simply called it the Iron Crossing for as long as anyone could remember. It stretched 240 meters across a slow river in a region that neither army had considered important before the war began. By the time both sides understood what the bridge actually meant, it was already too late to walk away from it. The first Russian unit to reach the bridge arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in the early summer. Captain Mikhail Orlov, 34 years old, a former engineer from Yekaterinburg, was given orders that sounded simple. Hold the western approach. Wait for further instructions. He had 82 men under his command, 3 armored vehicles, and enough supplies for what he believed would be 10 days. He would later write in a letter to his wife that he could hear birds singing the morning he arrived. He would not hear them again for a long time. The first Ukrainian unit reached the eastern side of the bridge 36 hours later. Lieutenant Andriy Marchenko, 29 years old, a former school teacher from Lviv, looked through his binoculars at the Russian positions and counted what he could see. He reported the situation to his commander and was told to wait for reinforcements. Reinforcements did not arrive that week. They did not arrive the following week either. By the time additional Ukrainian forces reached the eastern bank, the Russian side had also grown. Both armies, in different cities, in different command rooms, had quietly decided that this small bridge mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. What neither side knew, at least not at first, was that beneath the bridge ran a series of communication cables connecting 2 regional power grids. Disrupting these cables would have caused outages across hundreds of kilometers, affecting hospitals, water systems, and millions of civilians on both sides of the conflict. Neither commander wanted to be responsible for the consequences of damaging the structure itself, and so the fighting that followed was unlike any other along the front. No artillery strikes against the bridge, no airstrikes, no demolition attempts, only soldiers on both sides, fighting for control of something they could not afford to break. Captain Orlov had served in the Russian military for 12 years. He had been in Syria. He had been in Georgia. He believed he had seen the worst of what war could ask of a man. He had not. By the second month, his unit had lost 14 soldiers. By the 4th month, that number had grown to 41. He stopped writing letters home around that time. He told the men under his command that they were holding ground for a reason, even when he himself was no longer certain what that reason was. At night, he would sometimes walk to the edge of the bridge and listen to the river beneath it. Lieutenant Marchenko, on the eastern side, kept a small notebook. In it, he wrote the first names of every soldier his unit lost. By the 3rd month, he had filled 26 pages. By the 5th month, he had stopped writing first names and had started writing only initials, because he had run out of room. He told a journalist later, in an interview that was never published, that the bridge had begun to feel like a person, something that watched both sides, something that waited. He said the river never froze that winter, even when the temperature dropped well below 0, and the men on both sides took this as a sign, though no one could agree what it meant. There were moments of quiet that neither side could explain. Once, during a heavy snowfall in late autumn, both units stopped firing for nearly 6 hours. Soldiers on the western bank reported hearing music drifting across the river. Soldiers on the eastern bank reported the same thing. Years later, no one would be able to confirm where the music came from or who was playing it. Some of the men who survived believed it was someone from their own side. Others believed it came from the other. A Russian sergeant who had been there said the music sounded like a song his grandmother used to sing. A Ukrainian corporal said it reminded him of his wedding day. By the 5th month, the bridge itself had begun to change. Sandbags had piled up on both ends. Improvised barriers covered both sides of the road's surface. Holes had been dug into the structure for cover. The bridge that had once carried farm trucks now carried something else entirely: the weight of 2 armies that could not let go. Photographs taken from satellites during this period showed the structure clearly. But military analysts who reviewed those images years later noted something strange. The bridge had not been damaged. It stood almost exactly as it had on the first day. A Russian colonel who visited the area in late autumn reported back to Moscow that the operation was no longer strategically justified. He was reassigned within 2 weeks. A Ukrainian general who reviewed casualty figures from the same period quietly recommended that his forces withdraw to a more defensible line. His recommendation was set aside. By the time the 6th month began, the bridge was no longer about the bridge. It was about not being the side that left first. Both governments had grown silent on the subject in their public communications. The end, when it came, was not a battle. There was no final assault. There was no decisive moment. One morning in early spring, both Captain Orlov and Lieutenant Marchenko received orders to pull back. The orders came from different cities, from different chains of command, but they arrived within hours of each other. Whether this was a coincidence or the result of quiet diplomatic communication that neither government has ever acknowledged remains unclear to this day. Some analysts believe a third party may have been involved. Others suggest both sides simply ran out of reasons. The Russian unit withdrew first, in the early hours before dawn. The Ukrainian unit, observing the retreat, waited. Lieutenant Marchenko reported the situation. He was told to advance. He gave the order. His men crossed the bridge for the first time in 6 months. They found Russian positions abandoned. They found supplies left behind. They found notebooks. They found photographs. They found letters that had never been sent. One of the letters, addressed to a woman in Yekaterinburg, was later returned to her by a Ukrainian soldier through a humanitarian channel. She has never spoken publicly about what it said. By the time the Ukrainian unit reached the Western Bank, they had been ordered to pull back as well. Reports later suggested that the area was being reorganized as part of a broader operational shift. Whatever the reason, by the end of that day, neither side held the bridge. It stood empty for the first time in 180 days. For 3 weeks, no flag flew above it. Then a third element arrived. A small group of local civilians who had returned to see what was left of their homes. They walked across the bridge in silence. One of them, an older woman who had grown up in the area, placed a single white cloth on the railing at the center. She would later say it was not for one side or the other. It was for everyone who had not come home. The cloth remained there, untouched, for nearly 2 months. Captain Orlov survived. He returned to Yekaterinburg. He has not given an interview since. Lieutenant Marchenko also survived. He returned to Lviv and went back to teaching. When students ask him about the war, he tells them about the music that drifted across the river during the snowfall. He does not tell them anything else. He still keeps the small notebook on a shelf in his classroom, though he never opens it in front of anyone. Of the 82 Russian soldiers who had originally arrived with Captain Orlov, only 31 returned home. Of the original Ukrainian unit, the numbers were similar. The bridge itself still stands. It carries traffic again, slowly, on the days when traffic is allowed to pass. The cables beneath it still connect the regional power grids. Drivers passing through often have no idea what happened there. In Moscow, no monument was built. In Kyiv, no memorial was raised. The bridge appears in no official histories. It exists only in the notebooks of men who survived, in the letters that were never sent, and in the white cloth that someone tied to a railing in the early days of spring. Some stories of this war are told on television. Others are written in books. But there are stories like this one that live only in the quiet places, in the long silences of those who came home and could not explain what they had seen. And perhaps that is where they were always meant to remain, far from the noise of headlines. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, that pause is what we are here for. On this channel, we tell the stories that headlines cannot fit and history books often forget. Stories of soldiers, civilians, decisions, and the long silences that follow them. Stories from every side of every front. If you want more analysis of operations the world has not yet heard about, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Leave a comment below telling us which forgotten story you want us to tell next. Because every soldier on every side has a name, and every name deserves to be remembered. We will see you in the next story.